We think about fire as a basic human need, like water or food. It's hard to imagine life without it. No cooked meals, no warm hearth on a cold night, no light after the sun goes down. No protection from things that hunt in the dark, and yet, for most of our evolutionary history, we lived without it. Not just us Homo sapiens, but our ancient ancestors, the ones who came before us. They thrived for millions of years in a world without controlled fire. They were born, they lived, they raised children, and they died, all without ever striking a spark or tending a flame. How did they do it? It's one of the biggest questions about our past. The answer isn't one simple trick. It's a whole suite of behaviors, biological tools, and social strategies. They weren't just waiting around for the invention of the campfire. They were masters of a different world, a world ruled by the sun and the seasons, a world of raw food and constant vigilance. To understand their survival is to understand what it truly means to be a creature of nature, shaped by its harsh and beautiful realities. Let's start with the most basic problem, food. We are obsessed with cooked food. Cooking does amazing things. It kills parasites and bacteria, it breaks down tough fibers and proteins, making them easier to digest. It unlocks nutrients that would otherwise pass right through us. A cooked potato gives us far more energy than a raw one. A piece of cooked meat is a calorie bomb compared to its raw, chewy counterpart. So how did our ancestors get enough energy to fuel their bodies and, crucially, their growing brains? First, they ate a lot of things we wouldn't consider food today. They were expert foragers. This wasn't just picking berries. It was a deep encyclopedic knowledge of the landscape. They knew which roots were edible and when to dig for them. They knew which leaves were nutritious and which were poison. They ate nuts, seeds, fruits, and tubers. They also ate insects, grubs, termites, ants. These are packed with protein and fat. A handful of termites is a fantastic source of energy. It sounds gross to us, but for them it was just food. Their bodies were also different. Look at the skulls of early hominins like Australopithecus or Homo habilis. They had massive jaws, huge, thick enameled molars. These weren't for show, they were for grinding. They spent a huge portion of their day just chewing. Breaking down tough, fibrous plant matter required serious dental hardware and powerful jaw muscles. Their teeth show the wear and tear of a gritty, tough diet. Think of a chimpanzee spending hours chewing leaves and stems. Our ancestors did the same, but on the savanna with different plants. Their guts were also likely much larger and more powerful than ours. A big gut with a long intestinal tract is necessary to ferment and extract nutrients from tough plant matter. This kind of digestive system takes a lot of energy to run. It's a biological trade-off. You can either have a big, expensive gut to process low-quality food, or you can find a way to eat high-quality food and shrink the gut. For millions of years, our ancestors had the big gut, but plants and insects alone probably weren't enough, especially as their brains began to get bigger. All brains are incredibly greedy organs. They demand a ton of calories. To fuel that growing brain, they needed something more energy-dense. They needed meat and fat, but how do you get meat without fire and without sophisticated hunting weapons? For a very long time, we probably weren't the great hunters. We were the great scavengers. This is a crucial shift in how we see our ancestors, not as mighty hunters taking down mammoths, but as clever opportunists. Imagine the African savanna 2 million years ago. It was full of giant predators. Saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, lions. These animals were making kills all the time. A saber-toothed cat would kill a large animal, like an ancient buffalo. It would eat its fill, but it couldn't eat the whole thing. Its specialized teeth were great for slicing flesh, but not for crunching bone or getting into every little crevice. That's where our ancestors came in. A small group of Homo habilis walking on 2 legs could scan the horizon. They'd watch for vultures circling in the sky. That was a sign of a fresh kill. They would approach cautiously. The main predator might still be around. Other scavengers, like hyenas, would be a threat. It was a dangerous game. They had a secret weapon, though, not claws or big teeth. They had stone tools. The very first stone tools, called Old Dowan tools, were incredibly simple. Now, they were just rocks, a core rock smashed with another rock, the hammerstone, to knock off a sharp flake. It doesn't look like much, but that sharp flake was a game changer. It was a portable razor blade. With a stone flake, you could slice through a tough animal hide faster than a lion could with its teeth. You could quickly cut off chunks of meat and run, get in, get the meat, and get out before the big predators or a pack of hyenas showed up. It was a smash and grab operation, but the real prize wasn't just the leftover meat. It was what was inside the bones. Bone marrow is one of the most calorie-rich foods in nature. It's pure fat and protein, but It's locked away inside a thick bone. Most predators can't get to it. And hyenas can crunch through some bones, but not the biggest ones. Our ancestors had the key. They used their other simple tool, the hammerstone. They would take the big, heavy leg bones of a carcass, place them on a rock anvil, and smash them open with the hammerstone. Inside was the marrow, a fatty, energy-dense meal that no one else could get to. This was their niche. They weren't competing with the lions for the best muscle meat. They were getting the leftovers that were, in some ways, even better. And they didn't just eat meat. They likely ate the whole head. After smashing open the skull, they could access the brain. The brain is another organ packed with fat and essential nutrients, perfect for fueling their own growing brains. It sounds brutal, but it was survival. This strategy of scavenging, of using simple tools to access high-quality foods that others couldn't, was a cornerstone of their existence for a very, very long time. They also processed their food without heat. Pounding was a huge deal. Take a tough, fibrous tuber. Chewing it raw is hard work, and you might not get much from it. But if you take a rock and pound it into a paste first, you've mechanically broken down the fibers. You've pre-digested it, you've made the nutrients more accessible to your body. We find stones that were clearly used for this kind of pounding activity. It was a form of cold cooking. It made inedible plants edible and tough plants easier to eat and digest. So the food problem was solved through a combination of things. Deep knowledge of the environment, the right biological hardware like strong jaws and a robust gut, and the simple but brilliant technology of stone tools to scavenge meat, marrow, and brains and to process tough plants. It was a tough way to make a living, but it worked. It fueled them for millions of years. The next big problem is safety. The world was a very dangerous place. Without fire, the night is long and dark. And the things that hunt in the dark are big and have sharp teeth. How do you protect yourself from a saber-toothed cat when all you have is a rock and a sharp stick? Again, the answer is a collection of strategies, not one magic bullet. The most important defense was being in a group. There is safety in numbers. A lone hominin is an easy target. A group of 10 or 20 is a much harder problem for a predator. They could cooperate. They could have lookouts. Some could forage while others watch for danger. If a predator approached, they could present a united front. Imagine a leopard stalking a group of baboons. A single baboon is an easy meal, but the whole troop will turn on the leopard. They will scream, bare their teeth, and charge. They can drive it away. Our ancestors likely did the same. They could yell, wave their arms, and throw rocks. A well-aimed rock might not kill a giant hyena, but it would certainly hurt and might convince it to look for an easier meal. In-group defense was their primary shield. This reliance on the group meant that social bonds were everything. Trust, cooperation, communication, these weren't just nice things to have. They were essential for survival. The individuals who were better at cooperating, at reading social cues, at forming strong alliances, were the ones who survived and passed on their genes. Our social intelligence, our deep-seated need for community, was forged in this dangerous, fireless world. But group defense only works when you're awake and alert. What about when you sleep? Sleep is the most vulnerable time. The solution was simple and effective. They climbed. For millions of years, our ancestors had bodies well-suited for climbing trees. They had long arms and mobile shoulder joints. Even as we became better walkers, we retained a lot of that climbing anatomy. At night, the safest place to be was up in a tree. Leopards can climb, but it's harder for them to attack a whole group in the complex, three-dimensional space of a tree canopy. Other big predators, like lions and hyenas, are stuck on the ground. So a typical day might have involved foraging and scavenging on the ground as a group, always vigilant. Then, as dusk approached, they would retreat to a known safe spot, a grove of trees with good climbing branches, and settle in for the night. They might have built simple sleeping platforms or nests, much like modern apes do. It wasn't a cozy bed by a fire, but it was relatively safe. They also used the landscape itself. A cliff face with a small ledge is a great place to spend the night. A cave, even a shallow one, offers protection from the wind and hides you from view. It's a common misconception that cave dwelling only started with fire. Animals have always used caves for shelter. Our ancestors were no different. A dark cave at night might seem scary to us, but to them it might have been a fortress, especially if the entrance was small and defensible. Their entire life was dictated by the sun. They were intensely diurnal. Their activity was confined to daylight hours. When the sun was up, they were active, foraging, socializing, moving. As the sun went down, the world transformed. It became the domain of the nocturnal predators. Their world shrank to their safe sleeping spots. The day was for living. The night was for surviving. This rhythm, this strict adherence to the cycle of light and dark, was a fundamental survival strategy. There's no artificial light to extend the day, the world shut down for them at sunset. Then there's the problem of warmth. Fire provides warmth. It allows us to live in cold climates. Without it, how did our ancestors survive cold nights or expand out of the warm tropics of Africa? Part of the answer is that for a very long time they didn't. Early hominins like Australopithecus and Homo habilis were creatures of Africa. They lived in relatively warm climates where freezing to death wasn't the primary concern. Chilly nights happened, of course, but not the deep, prolonged cold of a northern winter. They also had biology on their side. We lost most of our body hair, but they were likely much hairier than we are. A coat of fur provides excellent insulation. Think of a chimpanzee, they do just fine on cold mountain nights. Our ancestors had a similar natural coat. Behavior was just as important. What do you do when you're cold? You huddle. Group living wasn't just for defense, it was for thermoregulation. By sleeping in a tight group, they could share body heat. This is a strategy used by countless animals, from penguins to puppies. It dramatically reduces heat loss for each individual and keeps the whole group warmer. They would have sought out sheltered spots out of the wind. They would have used leaves and grasses to make nests or bedding, providing a layer of insulation from the cold ground. And as human species like Homo erectus began to move into more temperate regions in Asia and Europe, they faced bigger challenges with cold. They had to be even better at finding natural shelters. They might have used animal hides for warmth, though the evidence for this is very hard to find. Most importantly, they were mobile. They could follow the warmth. If a region got too cold in the winter, they could move to a lower elevation or a more southerly latitude. They lived a nomadic life, following the seasons and the availability of food and water. They weren't tied to one spot. This flexibility was key. They didn't need to conquer the cold with fire. They could avoid the worst of it through movement. Survival wasn't just about food, safety, and warmth. It was also about the mind. What was their world like without the focal point of a campfire? The campfire is more than just a tool, it's a social hub, it's a place where people gather at the end of the day. They share food, they tell stories, they plan for the next day. It extends the usable day, creating a new social space in the darkness. Without that, social life was different. It happened out in the open during the day. Social bonding would have revolved around shared activities, foraging together, defending the group together. Grooming was likely incredibly important, just as it is for other primates. Picking parasites from each other's fur isn't just about hygiene, it's a social glue. It builds trust and reinforces relationships. It's a quiet, intimate activity that strengthens the bonds that kept them all alive. Their minds were being shaped by different pressures. They needed a phenomenal memory. A mental map of a huge territory. Where are the water holes? When does that fruit tree ripen? Where did we see that lion last week? Where can we find the right kind of stones for making tools? This information was a matter of life and death. They also needed a deep understanding of the natural world. They had to be expert naturalists. They had to recognize animal tracks. They had to understand animal behavior, to know when to approach a carcass and when to run. They had to have a botanist's knowledge of plants. This was their science. It was practical, empirical knowledge passed down through generations, not by writing, but by demonstration and observation. Life was lived in the present moment, dictated by immediate needs and the rhythm of the sun. The world was likely a place of intense sensory awareness, the sound of a snapping twig, the smell of a predator on the wind, the sight of vultures on the horizon. Their senses were their early warning system. They lived in a state of alertness that we can barely imagine, so for millions of years this was the human story. A story of resilience, intelligence, and deep connection to the natural world. They were not primitive, brutes waiting for a spark. They were a highly successful lineage of primates, perfectly adapted to their environment. They solved the fundamental problems of life with their bodies, their brains, and most importantly, their bonds with each other. The arrival of fire changed everything. It's not clear exactly when we mastered fire. The evidence is tricky. A patch of burnt earth could be from a natural wildfire, not a controlled hearth. But by around 400,000 years ago, and certainly by 300,000 years ago, there is clear and widespread evidence of controlled fire use by our ancestors, like Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals. When they finally harnessed fire, it was the single biggest technological revolution in human history. It kicked off a cascade of changes. Suddenly, the food problem was transformed. Cooking food made it safer and vastly more nutritious. This is the core of what's known as the cooking hypothesis, championed by biologist Richard Wrangham. He argues that cooking is what made us truly human. By cooking our food, we offloaded a lot of the work of digestion from our bodies to the fire. our guts could shrink, and all the energy that once went to maintaining a huge, expensive digestive system was freed up. Okay, where did that energy go? To the brain. The human brain exploded in size around the same time that fire use became common. Cooking provided the high-quality, easily digestible fuel needed to support a large, calorie-hungry brain. Our jaws and teeth could shrink because we no longer needed to spend our days grinding tough, raw food. Our entire anatomy was reshaped by the act of cooking. The safety problem was also revolutionized. A campfire is the best predator deterrent there is. Most animals are naturally afraid of fire. A group sleeping around a fire was infinitely safer than a group huddled in a tree. Fire kept the things in the dark at bay. It gave our ancestors a secure base. They could finally claim the ground at night. They could inhabit deep caves that were once the lairs of bears or hyenas. And fire conquered the cold. With fire, humans could survive in environments that were previously off limits. They could endure cold winters. This allowed them to spread out of Africa and across the entire globe, from the frozen steppes of Ice Age Europe to the far reaches of Siberia. Fire was our ticket to the world. It also changed our social lives. The hearth became the center of the world. It extended the day. For the first time, there was a space for social life after dark. This was a time for making and repairing tools, for planning the next day's hunt, for sharing knowledge. And perhaps for telling stories. In the flickering light of the fire, language could flourish. His culture could deepen. The complex social world we now inhabit has its roots around that ancient flame. Looking at what fire gave us makes it even more incredible that our ancestors survived for so long without it. Their success highlights their incredible toughness and adaptability. They were not a lesser version of us. They were a different kind of human, playing by a different set of rules. Their world was smaller, constrained by daylight and geography. Their diet was a constant challenge to search for calories that demanded immense effort. Their lives were lived with a level of vigilance and risk that we can't really comprehend. Every night was a test, every meal was a victory, but they were not just surviving. They were evolving. The pressures of that fireless world shaped us. The need to cooperate in a group made us social. The need to find food with simple tools made us clever and innovative. The need to outsmart predators and competitors made us strategic. The foundations of humanity, our social nature, our intelligence, our tool use, were all laid down long before the first campfire was lit. So when we ask how early humans survived without fire, the answer is everywhere. They survived in their bones, their teeth, and their guts. They survived in their social groups and their shared knowledge. They survived in their simple stone tools and their complex mental maps. They survived because they were masters of their world, not because they had mastered the elements. The story of life without fire is not a story of deprivation. It's the story of our deep history. It's the epic tale of our origins, a multi-million-year journey that proves that the human spirit, even before we called it that, was defined by one thing above all else: the will to endure and to find a way. Fire didn't make us human. We were already human. Fire just allowed us to become a new kind of human, one that would eventually change the face of the entire planet.